When we think about strategic planning in the life of the church, let's take a minute to think about how that fits with vision and mission in the life of the church. Remember that mission is what we exist to do, and vision is how we exist to do it. In other words, mission is the large picture, vision is the particulars. How we are accomplishing our mission in this place and time, given these resources, given everything that we know to this point. Strategic planning, therefore, is the process of how we move from mission to vision. Strategic planning can be a logical and sequential process, or it can be more organic and fluid. It all depends on the situation, the persons involved, the life of the congregation or organization that you're working with. The leader is critical, but is not the person who will create the vision. The leader must guide, but not direct the process. In strategic planning, the purpose of planning is action, not planning. We do not plan so that we'll have a good plan. We plan so that we will accomplish the goals of the organization. And so therefore the purpose of planning is mission, not meetings. It's not about how we're going to meet one more time to create one more structure or one more committee assignment. It's about accomplishing the mission of the organization. And so the purpose of strategic planning, notice it's not long-range planning, strategic planning is how we accomplish and achieve our goals. Or as Weems would say, how we take the next faithful step. The purpose of planning is never to be more planning and more reports. So when we think about strategic planning, we need to mention a couple of ways sort of in general before we get into any specifics. Strategic planning is diagnostic in focus. What that means is that we collect data, but it's more than data collection. It's collecting data and then analyzing that data to figure out what we're going to do with it. Also, it's diagnostic in focus because we examine central characteristics. We try to come up to some understanding of what it is that makes the organization, the congregation, the nonprofit, the ministry setting function the way it does, what has been the history of how it has functioned, what are the current realities, and therefore we can move toward the future. But not only is it diagnostic in focus, it's strategic in its decisions. And so you claim the strengths. You decide what is it that we do really well, and you claim those, and then you work to expand on those strengths. It is responsibly and courageously hopeful. Strategic planning is done so that we will improve the situation, that we will take a step forward, that we will help the congregation, the organization, the mission setting, help them move forward in their accomplishing their mission. And so therefore, you don't do strategic planning assuming that you're going to fail. You do strategic planning assuming that you're going to succeed. Ken Callahan, in his book, The 12 Keys to Effective Churches, mentions 12 characteristics, and they are in order, for their importance in understanding the life of individual congregations. Now, this material has been gathered from an extensive study over many years and thousands of congregations. And the first 6 of those characteristics, he calls them relational characteristics. The first of those is specific, concrete, missional objectives. Those churches that have been effective in missional outreach have tended to identify very specific human hurts and hopes with which they have shared their principal leadership and their financial resources. Generally, an effective local church has 1, 2, maybe at the outset 3 objectives in the local community, but they focus their attention specifically on these hurts and hopes. Secondly, those churches that are effective in their mission and receiving the work of the church into the congregation and out of the congregation into the community has concrete pastoral and lay visitation. A good rule of thumb would be an average of 20 visits per week with the church and 20 visits per week with the people in the community, but it's not necessary that you follow that strict pattern. These visits are made by the pastor and a group of key lay people, but it is essential that the pastor, the staff, and the key lay persons get to know who they're working with. that these people get to know them and trust them. Because as we know, one of the most important successes in your mission is having people trust the leadership. Thirdly, effective churches have corporate dynamic worship. Effective, successful congregations invest an appropriate amount of time and leadership in developing services of worship that are corporate and dynamic. What we mean by that is that worship will continue in the future to be one of those major places where unchurched persons and newcomers come, and they discover that a congregation will share them with them, will help them in strong, warm, winsome ways. They will involve them. It's not a show. It's a worship service that we do together, and it's done dynamically, powerfully. Next, effective churches have significant relational groups. Effective and successful congregations have discovered that people are more important than programs, that people reach other people, precisely because all of us search for groups where we can discover significant relationships. Effective congregations offer these kinds of groups and start new groups of similar characteristic in thoughtful and helpful ways. It's a place to be known and to know. Effective congregations have strong leadership resources. Strong leadership generates enormous power and momentum to advance a congregation forward. That power is neither dictatorial or authoritarian, neither oppressive or domineering, but rather strong leadership generates power to effectively develop specific missional objectives. Pastoral lay visitation, corporate dynamic worship, significant relational groups need strong leadership resources. And finally, the sixth relational characteristic is a streamlined structure, participatory decision making. Solid decisions have to be made. Ownership and openness to all opinions are high. The process is as important as the decisions themselves, and the organizational structure is streamlined, constructive, helpful, not cumbersome and bureaucratic. There's a direct correlation between decision making and structure. In addition to these 6 relational characteristics, Ken Callahan identifies 6 functional characteristics. Let me digress for just a moment and say that relational characteristics are sources of satisfaction for persons in congregations. Functional characteristics are seldom sources of satisfaction, but can often be sources of dissatisfaction when they're not present. And so they function in a different way. Competent programs and activities, open accessibility, high visibility, adequate parking, landscaping, adequate space and facilities, and finally, solid financial resources are all functional characteristics. They're necessary for the life of the congregation and must be present in some way. But these, in and of themselves, will never make people feel good about your organization. Having a nice place to park is not going to overcome a poorly planned worship service. Having a solid financial base is not going to overcome having a place where you know that you belong and that people care about you. The relational characteristics are what makes the organization function well. These functional characteristics are there to support that. So when you think about planning, the first thing that must happen is some accurate, realistic assessment. Persons must be able to stop and say, okay, where are we? What do we have? How can we think about these 12 characteristics? And so what are we to do to plan for these characteristics? How will we make decisions about what our primary direction is going to be? My general rule of thumb is that no more than 3, usually 2 of these characteristics need to be in the forefront and in the congregation's mind at any one given time. For example, if you plan through and you say, here's a realistic assessment of who we are. We're about a 7 on a scale of 1 to 10 for worship. We're about a 3 on relational groups. We're high in financial resources and good parking and good landscaping. We got good visibility in the community, but for some reason we're not seeming to get anywhere. You look at that and you go, oh, we can see why, because we see that the relational characteristics need to be attended to. So you always want to make a tentative decision for where are we going to go first? Where are we going to put our attention, first of all? And so you study the strengths thoughtfully. And you say, honestly, here's where we are. And then after you've done that, you move forward to see where you can go for the future.